that occurred to me when Carlin read through those list of questions is it all seemed to be about a transaction between the reviewer and the author, reviewer and the publisher, when everyone here has said, as a critic oneself, and I've written probably far too much criticism for my own good and everyone else's, are you really thinking of the reader? I mean, you're seeing it as a, certainly not performance art, but a kind of narrative that will engage the reader's interest. And I think when we talk a lot about the ethics of reviewing, we are covertly and sometimes overtly degrading the principles of criticism. And that my predecessors have said that much better than I can, so I'll just leave it at that. A couple of other questions that have come up. We have a review running this Sunday. Forgive me if I've got the dates wrong. We close so early, I never know. What's coming up for me, in my mind, for next Sunday is often 2 or 3 weeks ahead. I think it's this Sunday, is Jonathan Lethem on Ian McEwan's new novel. And when I approached him, we put him through the New York Times ringer about ethics, and he said, which is conflict again. And he said, well, I did once have a comradely lunch or dinner with Ian McEwan, but I think I can write about him well. And he wrote what I think is one of the really superb essays we've published for just the reasons Christopher has mentioned, and John and Francine as well, because he grasps the meaning of the work at its root. He's a fellow novelist who also has a kind of theoretical idea about what fiction can and can't do. He understands him with the respect that a major practitioner in the same field has, but someone who's also read very widely and deeply in literature. He's a gorgeous writer himself. Who gains if Lethem doesn't write that review? Who profits from it? Maybe we could huddle somewhere in a room, that is my colleagues and I, and say, well, we dodged that bullet. But it wasn't a bullet. It was a gift that was denied our readers. A couple of other examples. Early on, I started in the job just a little over 3 years ago, Jonathan Franzen sent us a note. And he said, look, I want to write something about Alice Munro. I think this is one of the great living writers. And that's what I'm going to say. So I thought, well, now, do you not want to hear what Jonathan Franzen has to say about Alice Munro? I wanted to see what he had to say, and I think it's one of the great and really influential pieces we've published. A more recent example, we had Christopher's book, God Is Not Great. And Christopher, did I hear you say God bless to someone when we walked in? Or is that you did? And we decided, we asked ourselves, who would be interesting on this? And Mike Kinsley seemed like a guy who would write about it in an intelligent, lively way, partly because he does know Christopher. And so in the note I sent him, I said, I assume you two were acquainted. Let's make that clear somehow in the review and take it on its own terms. And I didn't hear many complaints about that review. There were objections that Mike also is an atheist, but it seemed to us at this point, with so many books being written on the topic, and so few with the panache and wit of Christopher's, you want a critic who has the same panache and wit. You want a kind of duel of interesting minds. And so it's a review we're very happy to have done. And the last thing I'll say is not long into this job I now hold, one of my esteemed colleagues, Julie Just, said, you'll know who your friends are when you leave this job. And I said, that's not a problem. I don't have any friends anyway.
So I'm just realizing sitting up here that I'm faint with hunger. So if if this is non-coherent, I apologize. As far as the survey, I could run through the questions and say yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. But I also think that this issue of ethics is probably overstated, or maybe we're not looking at it from the right filter. From my point of view as an editor, it boils down to a kind of case-by-case basis. I don't have very many hard and fast rules. The primary one in terms of the reviewers that I work with is disclose to me first. I mean, we also put reviewers through we ask them about potential conflicts, and I've had people say, and I say no potential conflict is too stupid. So I've had people say, I don't know if I can review a book, a certain novel that Knopf published because Knopf turned down my last novel. And I say, fine, that doesn't bother me unless it bothers you. I mean, for me, the real issue is, can the reviewer write, and well, I don't really believe in objectivity as a concept, so that's the wrong way, but as objective as it can get. Can the reviewer take the book on its own terms and create a review that, I agree with what Francine was saying, that needs to be a reading experience, a discrete and wonderful reading experience on its own, that needs to be part of a three-dimensional conversation between the reviewer, the writer of the book under review, and the reader of the review. I think that's a very important point, that it's not just about the reviewer on the book, but there is a third party in this, and I think that third party is in many ways the most important party. And does the reviewer have something to say that is compelling and interesting and informative and real about what this book is, what this book does? And I think that those questions they don't break down to a survey for me. They're a really individual case-by-case situation. So, for instance, if you are signing a review of Don DeLillo, it matters, in my view, that the reviewer is familiar with DeLillo's career. It doesn't necessarily matter whether the reviewer has been sympathetic entirely or not, but the reviewer has to know something about DeLillo. It's a lot different than if you were assigning a review of a first novel or even of a third novel by a writer where the novel sort of stands on its own in terms of the review. I also think it's different if you're assigning a longer review or a shorter review. If you're assigning an essay-ish review, then the assumption, or at least my assumption, is that there will be more career context, more of a sense of placing this writer within a frame, whereas in a 600 or an 800-word review, it's often all a reviewer can do to basically assess the book. Of the book under question. So I want my reviewers to tell me any potential conflict, and then I'll decide case by case. I do draw the line at having friends review friends, because I think it gets tricky, and it's a tricky area I'd rather not go into. I don't review my friends' books as a reviewer, mostly because I want them to remain my friends. And also, I just feel like it's cleaner not to have that. But as far as acquaintances go, it depends on the nature of the acquaintance. If it's somebody you interviewed 10 years ago, does that invalidate you from writing a review? I don't think so, unless it's someone you had a strong reaction to. I was giving an example. I won't say who it is, but I was giving an example of a writer. I wanted to review a book, and then I interviewed this writer. And I also don't necessarily have a problem with a reviewer who does an interview with a writer and then also reviews the book. Again, it depends on whether that reviewer can maintain his sort of critical distance or critical judgment. But I wanted to review this book, and I interviewed the writer, and I detested the writer so much after spending an hour interviewing him that I couldn't review the book because I couldn't keep that out. So I opted out of reviewing that book. That was before I was an editor. So those things happen. I don't have an issue with reviewers saying to me, I don't want to review this book, or I've read part of this book and I don't want to review it, although I also think that it's the ethical obligation of the book review to publish negative reviews. I don't trust a critical voice, whether it's a critic's voice or a publication's voice, that isn't willing to be negative. But that said, I also don't trust a publication or a critic that where the negativity is gratuitous. I think what Christopher was saying is really important, that even though he wanted to give that book a bad review, he couldn't, because he liked the book. He thought the book was remarkable. And I think that, to me, is the ultimate ethical standard. Can you praise the book even though you don't want to? Or can you criticize the book or take it on even though you don't want to? And that, to me, is the real standard. And I could talk more specifically, but I'll stop there. Again, I just want to stress the idea that it really, to me, is very much a kind of case-by-case sort of situation, depending on the book under review, the review, and the editor. Oh, and the other thing I'll just say, one other thing I'll say is I also think it's the role of the book review to occasionally champion writers. So, for instance, last Sunday we put Lydia Davis on the cover because I think Lydia Davis is a remarkable short story writer who has never gotten her due, and so I wanted to put I wanted to put that book on the cover and give it